Hello everybody and welcome to today's edition of Liberty Action Network TV. I'm your host Doreen Finkel and we have a great show for you here today. We're going to be discussing communism and capitalism, both the similarities and the differences. And joining us today is our guest Arshak Benlian. He has experienced a country, Bulgaria. He grew up in a communist country and he has come to America, of course, the capitalist country, so you can help us share these differences. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Great to be here.
And before we get into the specifics, I want to ask you about your background.
Sure. I was born and raised in Bulgaria. I grew up in the 70s and 80s in Bulgaria during the communist regime, and the communist regime fell in 1989 in Bulgaria in November. In May 1990, I was already at JFK, starting my life anew in America. So ever since, I've been living here and establishing my life here in America.
So now, are all your brothers and sisters over here? Well, tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, I have two brothers, one older, one younger. They're both living in Europe. One is in Serbia, one is in Bulgaria. My father was a priest in the Armenian church in Bulgaria during the communist regime, and so was my grandfather. So I come from a family of priests, and in fact I was influenced by my grandfather and inspired by him to become a priest myself. So one of the reasons why I came to America is because my father has been visiting the United States since 1974, and for anybody, especially a priest in the Armenian church from Bulgaria, to travel to America, it's like a miracle. It's rarely, if ever, done. So my father had a very special status during that time to be allowed to travel outside of Bulgaria and to no other place but the United States of America, which was a main fault.
How was he able to get that status?
Right, so as a priest, you don't have much clout with the regime, but as a member of the Armenian church in Bulgaria, he was also responsible and representative of the Armenian community at large in Bulgaria. So there was a community of about 20,000 Armenians living in Bulgaria, and he himself was not born and raised in Bulgaria. He was born and raised in Beirut, Lebanon, as a result of the Armenian genocide by the Turks in 1915. Armenians got displaced, so my family from his side escaped south to Lebanon, and that's where they established themselves. And then later, in 1948, when Stalin opened the doors to in all of the republics to the Soviet borders and invited all the diaspora people from the respective republics for people to come back in, Armenians took that invitation, and my grandfather went to Armenia with his 5 children, one of them my father, and he realized he made the biggest mistake in his life, and that this was all a setup to take all his belongings and everything that he's been working for. So very shortly after my grandfather passed away, realizing the grave mistake he made and that he couldn't be able to provide for the 5 children. So my father was fortunate to end up in a seminary, get education, become a priest, become educated in theology and be ready for the priesthood, and then sent to Bulgaria. As a result, he had this connection with the Armenian seat, which is in Armenia, the Armenian church seat, and as a representative of the Armenian community, he would go back and forth and had a diplomatic status as a result of that. So by doing several favors to the see in Armenia, the Patriarch of Armenia interfered in his behalf, and he, via Moscow authorities and Politburo and all this stuff, were able to get him a visa to travel to America. And that's a fascinating fit to accomplish in communism.
That is.
Yeah.
And so now you mentioned you had brothers.
Right.
And you have a sister too?
No, I only have 2 brothers.
And your brothers are they here or?
No, they're there. My younger brother was educated in France. So what happened was in 1990 when I came to America, my younger brother went to France and he learned to speak French early on when he was like 12, 13 years old. And that was his dream, to go to live in France and be educated there. So he won a scholarship to at the University of Nice. He went there and he established himself there. At the time I came to America, I established myself here. My older brother was the only one staying in Bulgaria, and he was dreaming of coming to America one day. So it took him about 10, 11 years for him to get his green card while in Bulgaria, and while me and my father petitioning from here for him so he can get the visa. So finally in year 2000, my older brother got the visa, the green card. He came to America. He lived for about 8 years. He was crushed, disappointed, and he went back to Bulgaria. And now he's very happy and prosperous. My younger brother, he came in 1995, right before graduation from University of Nice. He saw New York, and he was living in the Riviera for 5 years. He said, New York is not for me, America is not for me, I'm going back to France. So, but eventually, France wasn't for him either. At least French didn't accept him as one of their own, and he ended up going back to Bulgaria himself.
Kind of leads me to my next question. When you decided to come to America, what was attractive to you for it?
Well,
what were you attracted by?
My father first came, as I said, in '74. So since '74, we have known through the pictures he brought in, through the videos he brought in, the real America, not the propagandized America to us via the mass media that the communists controlled. So the picture that we saw was dramatically different from the pictures we were taught to see or made to see by the government. And we realized that America is like living on Mars. It's like a different world. It's nothing like the world we live in. So I'll give you one instance that was interesting to us. For example, there was in the 60s, of course, it was all these civil riotings and the civil rights movements with the blacks and the whites and all this stuff. So the communists will portray America as, look at Americans. They're still having slaves. Look how they treat black people. They're imperialists. They're bad people. Look how well we live here in America, in Bulgaria. Everybody's equal. There is no difference. We treat everybody the same. And so they would show homeless people, black people, homeless, on the streets of New York, and we would notice that they were wearing Levi's jeans.
Really? Wow.
And we would say, well, there's something wrong with this picture. If homeless people in America can wear Levi's, then there's something wrong with us, because we're not homeless and we can only dream of Levi's jeans, but we can never obtain it. So that was the funny thing that we would notice.
So in other words, you got a different picture.
Yes. So the first thing that we noticed from the anecdotes that my father would bring back, and then my mom went in '77 with him, and they came back again. From that time on, my father's goal was that one day he'll take his family to America. And we knew why, because he had an opportunity to freely go to church and get on the podium, present a sermon without interruption from communist secret service. He can communicate to his parishioners freely and speak of whatever he wants to speak of. He had a freedom of expression. And not only that, but his concern was primarily with his kids, that his kids will be able to come to a place where they can pursue their own happiness. They can pursue their goals without interference from the teachers or the schools or the government or anybody else.
So now you're here, okay, and you see this different story of America.
Right.
Okay. What is your opinion? Do you think on going back to Bulgaria?
Well, today I'll be probably better off being in Bulgaria. I mean, Bulgaria today is freer than America. So America has lost itself in the last 25 years that I've been a resident and a citizen of the country. So when I first came at JFK, I couldn't sleep for like 3 days. I was going around the streets of Manhattan, and I didn't know the language even. But I just got lost in the labyrinth of skyscrapers, and I loved it. I love that opportunity that I can one day maybe build myself one of these skyscrapers. Maybe I'll put a name on one of these buildings. And as I went to college and I started learning the language, the culture, and everything else, I began to realize that America is shifting to a direction where I come from. It's becoming more and more group-oriented, collective-oriented. The individual is not as respected as if he's a member of a group. So if I say that I represent such and such group, then somebody will pay more respect to me than if I say I'm Arshak Benlian. They'll say, who?
Right, right. So can you give us an example, like when you were growing up in communist Bulgaria?
Sure.
Give us an example of, let's say, what the school system might be like.
Sure. Well, as in the United States, during the communist Bulgaria, you had elementary school, junior high, high school, and then college. So the difference is that the first day at school, you start learning the ABCs. One of the things that I remember that I've shared a couple of years ago at the Montclair University when we were presenting there with Andrew Bernstein, but they made the language in a way that you should not use the word I. It's impolite to say, I am at this show today, or I am being interviewed by Doreen Finkel today. I should not say, I cannot use the word I. Mm-hmm. And this was like enforced, and this was very strictly looked down upon if you use the word I. Did
you call, like, for example, your teacher comrade?
Well, yes. So
it's not Mr. or Mrs., it's comrade?
No. In fact, it was very difficult when, in 1989, when the communist regime fell, everybody wanted to go back to Mr. and Mrs., which was pre-communism. Mm-hmm. And in Bulgarian, the word Mr. comes from God. So it's God. Wow. Mr. would mean man of God, and Mrs. would mean a woman of God.
Oh, okay.
And so this was, it was lost by the communists on purpose. So when the communism fell and people started calling themselves Mr. and Mrs. in that context of the etymology of the word, the origin of the word, people were not at ease to bring that up. And it was funny to them to call themselves Mr. and Mrs. Everybody was used to saying comrade so-and-so.
So go ahead.
Just to make this point, because this is a crucial point for that kind of a setup in society. When you call someone comrade, when you take away the femininity or masculinity, when you take away the individuality of someone, and you make him a unified member of a group equal to everybody else, right? It's no longer bearing a unique soul of his own. He's a member of the group. He's a comrade like everybody else. So he's no longer Mr. He's no longer a man of nature or God or whatever it is. Then it's very easy to manipulate everybody because everybody is on the same unified, equal level. Where if I call you Mr., then you are not unified member of a group. You are Mr. So-and-so. And then, I mean, why do we have first name and last name?
Right.
If we were living in a village of 500 people, we don't need last names. But we live in a village of 7 billion people, so everybody needs a last name. And so the Mr. and Mrs. in front of the first and the last name makes you unique. And that's what they don't want you to be unique, to be different.
Oh, okay. So now let's also discuss the education, and I know you talked about it on radio shows.
Sure.
You have said that education, even in the United States, is now state-run.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't have to say that. I can just observe that.
Well, Common Core for one.
Oh, yeah. Common Core is definitely an attempt to centralize it. It's the final blow. So if Americans who haven't lived abroad in a more mixed societies and who think that by allowing more progressive education to step in to provide the gap that is created of need for education, if they think that this Common Core is going to fill in for substance, they're totally mistaken. Common Core by design is a failure, complete failure. But we have a system already in place where without the Common Core, it's already failure. So we failed at least 2 generations already, especially the last one. I mean, I've been here for 25 years. I can speak of the education I got in America and the education that I see that younger people are now getting. It's complete failure. There's no education in America.
So education in Bulgaria, was it almost the same, where you had a common curriculum like that?
Absolutely. I mean, when it comes to humanities...
Who decided on the curriculum in there, in Bulgaria?
Oh, yes. Well, it's the so-called
it's kind of like
party.
2 questions here.
Right. but it's... The party runs everything, right? So you have
the party, okay.
Yes, the Communist Party. So you have the designated Ministry of Culture or Ministry of Education.
Okay, and here we have Department of Education.
Right, which...
it's almost the same thing.
Well, it is the same. It's not almost. It's the same.
Just different wording.
Right. So, I mean, one thing from the get-go, when you said, now we're going to distinguish the communist from capitalist, my distinction is that America has never seen capitalism in the way that it should see capitalism.
Okay.
We live in a mixed society, and we've been living in a mixed society for generations now. The last 25 years that I've been here, the prevailing mixture comes from the place where I escaped, from communism. So we see less and less entrepreneurship being encouraged. We see less and less proper education being encouraged. And we see more and more centralized slogans given to younger people to uphold in general public meetings and so forth. And the latest example was a few years ago with 99% versus the 1%. When these kids or people that were protesting down on Wall Street were challenged to support the slogans that they were upholding, they stumbled. They couldn't articulate what's behind them ideologically or substantially behind it. So they only knew it as a something that they have to hold on to dearly, otherwise their world is ruined. So there is no education as we see it in many. I mean, you go listen to TV and watch TV and listen to radio. The language has changed. The English language has changed, right? Offline, before the show, we had a discussion that if you give the Federalist Papers today of the Founding Fathers to be read and understood by high school students today, they'll have no idea what's written there. It's English, but they wouldn't understand it.
Right. So
and that's the problem. Right.
Right. Let's go on to jobs and the economy.
Sure.
Okay, and let's talk about Bulgaria. In Bulgaria, under communist regime, did you have a wide array of stores to choose from?
Well,
like, let's say I wanted to buy pants or jeans for a woman, okay? Do we have the choice of going J.C. Penney's or...
Well, Macy's.
Yeah.
No way, no. In Sofia, which was it's the capital of Bulgaria, in a population of about 1.5 million residents, there was one central department store. Everything else, right?
So there was no choice of.
Oh, no, well, first of all, fundamentally, let's make the distinction. There's no private property under communism.
Right.
Okay. So there is no J.C. Penney.
Okay.
I mean, who's J.C. Penney? Who's Macy's? These are Mr. Macy's, Mr. Penney, and so forth, right? Goldman Sachs. Two guys started a company 100 and something years ago. General Electric started by Thomas Edison, right?
Right.
There is no such thing. There is no private property under communism. So everything is owned by comrade unknown, right? I mean, it's everybody owns everything. It's equal opportunity for all.
So you had no choice.
No choice. So if I wanted to buy pants, which I wanted to buy pants, I wanted to wear pants, especially in the winter in Bulgaria, there's only one kind of pants you're going to buy. That's it. If you want shoes, there's only one kind of shoe you're going to buy. There's no choice. That's why when we saw that the homeless people in America, as a propaganda to us, are showing that they're on the streets, which in Bulgaria there were no homeless people, but in America there were homeless people, and they were persecuted, the black minority homeless people, wearing Levi's. We were like, I want to be a homeless in America, I want to wear Levi's. But it wasn't there. So we had no choice to do anything.
And was it the same if you were food shopping?
Well, food shopping, I don't know if I share that, but that's one of the first things that I introduce myself to Americans that don't know me. So we meet and they say, where are you from? Bulgaria. And so how was life in Bulgaria? Well, let me give you an example. 24 hours before I came to JFK, it was May 13, 1990, I went to buy bread for our Last Supper to get it before my departure the next day. So I went to the local supermarket, and it was empty. The shelves were completely empty. It looked like somebody just emptied the whole store, and the store was closing out. There were a few people wearing white robes saying, sorry, we don't have it. We don't have anything right now. There were only like a couple of loaves, maybe, very stale, like very hot, like brick. There was nothing, no butter, nothing. And so I had to go to several places until I find some bread to come home with bread. The next day, 24 hours later, I'm at JFK, and we arrive around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a great sunny evening, and the first thing my father does, now he has the experience of coming to America for several times by then, he goes, once we set our luggage at our host, let's go to A&P. I'm like, what's A&P? He's like, supermarket. So we went in, and I saw one mountain of cheese, variety of cheese. I couldn't realize this cheese. I asked my father, what's this? And he said, this is cheese. I said, well, there are like 300 kinds of cheese here. He's like, well, that's like normal. Don't worry about it. Just follow me. I said, no, I can't. So I stepped out right away, and my father did his shopping for like 10-15 minutes. He was in seven heaven that, he's shopping and he can, see things that he wants to buy. I had a cigarette outside, and I had a huge headache, and I told him, I said, I'm not ready to shop. Don't take me to any stores. It was just overwhelming. It was crazy. And so that's the stark contrast between the communists and capitalists. But even if you don't go to an extreme, my mom had connection for tomatoes, connection for potatoes, connection for meat, connection for milk. So you had to know the person behind the counter, establish a relationship, give them some kind of a thing underneath the table, like a gift or something, so they can secure for you a liter of milk or a bread, fresh bread, and so you don't have to wait on line for hours. So even if you wait, you'll be ensured that you get the bread, that it's not going to be sold out. So this is like a common occurrence.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very different.
We do have a few minutes. I just want to get
Sure.
into religion and communism.
Sure.
And we all know that Karl Marx had said that religion is the opiate of the masses.
Sure.
Communism begins where atheism begins.
Well, I don't think the last part is accurate, but the first one maybe is. And the communists misinterpreted Marx in a very vicious way for all religious people. So one of the things that my father wanted to do in Bulgaria was to get together with priests from the Romanian church, from the Russian church, invite the rabbi in town and the Hoja, the Muslim priest or whatever they're called. So he wanted to create an ecumenical community, so all people of faith will come together and have a dialogue and talk about stuff. Of course, the communists would have none of this. And everything was controlled, and my father went through a lot of trouble with this. But even if you stay within your own church, and like my father did most of the time, or my grandfather, who was very defiant, and you just preach the word of the Bible or God, you get into a lot of trouble. So they always had secret service in all the churches throughout Bulgaria, and they would stop the priests from presenting the sermon in a way that it's not favorable to the communists. So everything was done under control, but it was still allowed to be done. The only difference is that the people allowed in the churches were the older people. So if you're 60 or younger, you may not be able as easily to go to church or the synagogue or the mosque. If you're 60 and over, then they'll close their eyes. So as a son of a priest and a grandson of a priest, I was always in the church. Right? I would go in and out, at least, if not participate in a mass or anything like this. We weren't allowed to be on the on the altar or be altar boys. But even just entering the church was a big deal. Our teachers would call us back and say, you cannot go to the church and stuff like that.
Okay, I have to cut you.
Sure.
We're out of time.
Okay, well, this was good.
And thank you for coming on our show today.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome anytime. And to our viewers, thank you for watching this edition of Liberty Action Network TV. Please go to studentsforbetterfuture.com for more information on the show. And thank you and good night.